All right, with the Last Dance, it has rekindled an old candle. It has brought all of the Barons, the Southern League, and everybody involved with Michael Jordan right back to the front of the pages. And it's my honor. I'm actually, not only did I call this guy and watch him, but he's a good friend. John Courtright, we're going to bring him in on our Zoom conference, but we became friends that year and talked a lot about what it was like to face Jordan. And especially I got a real big kick out of North Carolina and Duke. And that's one of those little hidden matchups, Bryce, that not a lot of people realize. So we'll bring John in. And we'll get an idea of what he's currently doing. John, why don't you tell us what you're currently doing before we get into the meat and potatoes of the Jordan year in 1994 and all that?
Absolutely. First off, thanks for having me. It's good to rekindle friendships and bring back some memories that were very unique, to say the least. Currently, I'm working in the player representation field with a company called ISC Baseball. I've been doing it now for about 18 years. It's allowed me to move from a quasi-successful playing career to hopefully a bit more successful world in guiding players' lives on and off the field. It keeps me certainly in the mix of the game, but also piques the curiosity of the business and the intellectual side. So I've been around it now for about 25 years and enjoy it very much to this day.
Were you prepping at all, John, while you were with Chattanooga and while you were climbing the Reds ladder? That's something that in the back of your mind, yeah, maybe one day I'll get on the other side, because I'm sure you drove your agent crazy.
Why do you think we consider ourselves a friendship? I was picking the brains of the smartest people around, and it wasn't necessarily the ones next to me in the dugout.
Right.
I guess in fairness, Kurt, my parents, put forth a lot of effort to try to get me through Duke University, and maybe in some way that was the start of an intellectual pursuit. I always was curious about the economics of it, the creativity of the game. And for a number of years in my career, I ended up being one of the older guys on a number of teams, which is not a great testament to a playing career. But a couple guys would turn to me and say, what do you got on this? What do you think about that? And it continued to kind of turn me in that direction. I think the most pivotal point was I was a member of the strike in 1994 and 95 as a rostered player. And that's where I really realized the impact, the realities, the hardships of the labor side of the game. And that was getting closer to a point where maybe my talents on the field were starting to show less than the rest of us or rest of the players. And so I think from that point forward, it really started angling me and what's my next step, and whether it was with a team or on my side. And I consider myself very fortunate that I earned the trust of what at the time was my agents, and I was able to transition into this side of the business.
John Courtright is joining us, first pitcher ever to face Michael Jordan. How much have you watched The Last Dance, or have you watched it with your kids at all?
I have 4 kids and a lovely wife. We have saddled up the last 2 Sundays. I've done a lot of shushing here and shushing there because I have wanted to hear and see every morsel of it. I have loved every second. I think they've really appreciated it. My youngest, it's 4 daughters. My youngest, maybe the first or second, so the first Sunday, maybe said, I may go get some water and could I not come back? But a lot of it was just maybe not really, showing my age, not knowing all the players in the game, so to speak, and the players in the documentary. I think as she got a little bit more ingrained in the narrative, they've really enjoyed it. I think it's exceptionally well done. Despite the obvious unique times here, Kurt, I think the ratings would be through the roof, and they've been through the roof times 10 because of the obvious.
John, what dawns on me, you and I couldn't be doing this if there was a season right now, because
Sure.
our time would be so much more limited. And so we've taken advantage, and both of us have turned what would be and is a negative into a positive.
Yep.
I just listened to that first at bat again, and one of the great things, and again, you're not sitting right where you are right now. If you were the opening day pitcher, Michael's first game was game 2.
Yeah.
Okay. So when did you know that as the second starter that you would be facing him, and what immediately went to your mind? What came to your mind?
You can never really answer a question with a question. I'm not exactly sure when everybody knew he was like physically dropping into Birmingham, because he had played that exhibition game, White Sox Cubs, if memory serves.
That's right.
So we didn't really know, and I can kind of go into this, the knowledge of what was going on with Michael, like on site, was very limited, particularly on like the visiting side. Long story short, in a unique part of professional baseball, I thought I was going to be in AAA Indy to start that year. I tell this to players that I'm fortunate enough to work with now. We were in a stretching circle on Field 3 in Plant City, Florida, that spring training, the second to last day of spring training. Bags had been shipped to Indianapolis. Tap on the shoulder. They want to see you in the office. Waiver claim at the major league level. AAA guy gets moved. Youngest guy at the time, John, you're going to go back to Chattanooga to start the year. I wasn't in a real good state of mind, Kurt. Pretty disappointing. The manager at the time is a gentleman who remains a dear friend named Pat Kelly. I work with his son. That shows my age now in this business. He kind of said, like, John, you need to chill out a little bit because it's a long year. I understand you're upset, but this is the business. I don't want to say he said, we're going to give you the first night off, but he said, we're going to slot you in because I didn't think you were going to be here either.
Right.
And in some confluence of events, I then became the guy on the second night, which then, in some kind of odd set of circumstances, to your point, that happened to be Michael's first game.
You saw, every pitcher goes over a lineup, okay? And you must have, like me, because the whole season was like, this is not happening. It's not happening. But when you see the lineup, you go over his scouting report, what did you do when it said, Jordan, tall right-handed guy? Was that
I think as much as
the time you
anything,
believed it?
It was just don't screw up. And the
Right.
definition of screwing up was don't hit them, which I did, and maybe you'll touch on. Don't walk them, which I got dangerously close to.
Yes, you did.
Maybe don't give up a hit, and don't do something to embarrass yourself. And again, I want to reiterate, my mindset was a little flustered. It was a combination of it's still the second game of the year. I'm not kind of fully functional physically and mechanically. I'm not in a real good spot mentally because I'm saying to myself, I shouldn't be here. Maybe I'm too good for this. Things that I'm clearly not, Kurt. But at the time, that's what I'm thinking. And so I was kind of pitching with what I would say was like a negative chip on my shoulder. And I remember as I got into that and I got behind early in that first at bat with Michael, I'll never forget, in one of the pitches, 3-1 or whatever, he swung and he kind of fouled off. But foul was a little strong. I mean, the ball hit his bat and then kind of went into a direction. and I mean it sarcastically, but it kind of woke me up a little bit.
Right.
Like, I'm here now. That's Michael Jordan. But as much as anything, it was like, John, you got to get out of this angry funk and kind of go compete regardless of who it is. But again, the idea of whether it was the first game or the second game, and certainly, Kurt, you had a first row seat to it. The mere fact that we're in a AA level and there's 10,000, 13,000, 15,000. The electricity was fantastic, going with every pitch of every game. That was so unique at the minor league level, and is something that, I remember to this day, was the ebb and flow of that crowd on every pitch to Michael.
When I read your bio, which is
short,
it was good enough because all I needed to see was Duke.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is Hollywood. Is somebody making this up? Duke, Carolina, and guess what you did? One of the 6 or 7 pitches up and in almost hit him. Was that Blue Devils versus Tar Heels, or was that
that story's probably gone in a couple different embellished ways through the course of the years, depending on who I'm speaking with. But the reality of it again is, it just was a terrible pitch. It's the second game of the season, my opening start. I am nervous. I am a little bit, my mind is going 1,000 different directions. But as I've tried to really tell baseball folks, I was a poor left-handed pitcher. We're talking about a 6'6" right-handed hitter. For a ball to go from my left hand on the mound up by the right-handed hitter's head at 6'6", pretty tough to think of a worse pitch than that. And the interesting, or maybe the humorous point on that is, Michael was so long levered.
Yes.
And that's what made him so uniquely great in just about everything. It's not maybe the greatest attribute for a hitter. And that's kind of what made the bat, go through a little bit slower through the zone, at least to start, as he was getting his timing and his rhythm. What's interesting is he kind of had a far stance away from home plate as he was getting ready to hit. And after that pitch went up by his head, I'm not sure his feet were even in the box the next pitch or two. Because I don't know if that was a strikeout or whatever it was, but I remember the catcher, and I think his name was John Fuller, a wonderful guy. I think he came out to get a little bit of airtime, and I remember him saying something like, "John, you could have thrown like a watermelon anywhere,
and he was going to swing
strike zone." And I just don't even know if his bat could have reached it, because I think he was a little bit shaken by what, again, was just an erroneous, horrible pitch.
Do you remember the final result of that first at bat? I do. I didn't have to listen to it.
It was a fly out where I was like, someone please catch it, whatever it may be.
A flare to Chad Mottola, big leaguer. Chad Mottola was playing right field. At first, if you remember it did appear it could fall in for a base hit, but Chad, made up the ground. Yeah. John, how much did you follow Michael the rest of that year? We played, the Bears played Chattanooga a ton. Did you care or watch what he was doing, or were you more focused, like you said, getting back on that ladder?
No, I did follow. I don't know the exact date. I was lucky enough, Kurt, that I actually did. I finally got moved up to AAA.
Right.
So I left the Southern League, but because of Michael and because of friends, I always would follow it. And then the unique part of this situation is, everywhere you guys traveled, you were like the Beatles. It was the greatest show in town. But on August 8th or August 12th, the game stopped because of the strike.
It did.
So not only were you the Beatles, minor league baseball was the only game in town. So everything became amplified. And then, I played in what became that Arizona Fall League that Michael joined that fall. So then, I saw him a number of more times during the course of that fall, which was an unusually long season. Maybe they've scaled it back in recent years. And the other part of it, again, we were the only baseball in the present or foreseeable future. And I read an interesting stat because of these things started to pique my curiosity in my memory bank again. And I think I read something, you're going to quote me because it's live on Zoom, but the Arizona Fall League attendance that year was more than like the compilation of all the previous season's attendance combined. And it was attributable to let's call it 99% Michael Jordan, and 1% that we had really good players because there was no other game to play.
The Barons played in front of just under 1 million people.
Wow.
When you look at home and road. And
Yep.
so you can imagine there were the old Expos and even really not too far away, the Marlins,
Yep.
which that number is greater. Before I go further, let me reintroduce again on our Zoom conference, John Courtright, left-hander, who was the first ever professional pitcher to face Michael Jordan in a game at Hoover Met back in 1994. John is now an agent, including one of his clients is Patrick Corbin.
Yeah.
Bryce, let me let you jump in for a moment. I know you've got a question or two to ask John. Jump in and get yourself some Zoom time.
Some Zoom time for sure. John, walk me back. You're in the clubhouse. Kurt touched on it. But as you see Jordan progress through the season, we've heard from teammates, from the hitting coaches, from inside the White Sox staff, just the progress that he made. But what amazement do you see from a guy who comes from playing basketball and just the pure athleticism for him to be able to get the first hit, get the first home run? And I know it's right above that Mendoza line, but if you pull the average guy off the street, he's not doing that. Just talk about that. What was it like to see that from a visitor's player standpoint?
I think a couple things of this. What did he end up hitting? 202?
202.
I think that's phenomenal because you could just as easily
Great.
hit 102 or .02.
Right.
So that's just a very clear kind of marker of how talented he was. And I think as much as anything, because I'd love to know how the graduation of his year went, his progress as a player, again, like checking in, like, hey, how are things going down there when you guys play the Barons? And Bryce, I have a little bit of like an idea. I've always said this in Arizona, the Arizona Fall League in the fall. If you didn't have any names on the back of the jerseys, and we did infield, outfield, we did batting practice, we played the game. I think anybody could have said, hey, I think that guy in right can play in the big leagues. I don't know for how long, don't know to what extent and what measures, but you would think that it would play out. The hardest thing for Michael Jordan, just like it is a 17-year-old kid exploring the draft in 2020, the ability to hit consistently is probably the hardest and the toughest thing to gauge present and future. And as I alluded to earlier, the many athletic gifts that I think made him the greatest by far on the basketball court, they're not always akin to long-term hitting success in baseball. So it could have gone here. The sustainability of it is something that, any baseball person would be, fair to question.
John, you mentioned that you had a chance during the Arizona Fall League and you guys had conversations. What were those conversations like?
Memories of Michael Jordan as it relates to peer-to-peer.
Yeah.
Were unbelievable.
That's right.
Look, again, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. Everything you ever heard was you knew who he was, but he didn't have to make you feel who he was per se, if that makes sense. And he made every effort to try to make everybody comfortable in a really, it's not uncomfortable, but such an incredibly unique locker room, clubhouse, bus, all those types of dynamics. I've said this to guys in the past. In the Fall League, particularly, we were the only game in town. There weren't as many like spring training homes like where the White Sox are now. We didn't have that many in Phoenix then. So it was a fairly kind of consolidated group. And that fall, he still, at least from what I read, at that time, he was still very close with Charles Barkley. And Charles was there. Maybe he was a son, maybe he was not, but he was there every day. And as things wore on in the fall, I'll never forget, there was an old place in Old Town Scottsdale, which a lot of baseball people know, maybe for its restaurants, maybe for other things. There was an old place called Jets and Sticks. Jets happened to be a place you could hang out a little bit at night. Sticks was the pool hall, but it was kind of in between. I'm probably going to embellish this a little bit.
Please do.
But Michael essentially rented out sticks every night. He and Charles would go play pool. And by a month into the fall league, it pretty much was an open invitation. If you were a ball player, and it probably didn't mean an NFL player, probably didn't mean an NBA player. If you were an Arizona Fall League player, like one of him, all drinks, all food, come play some pool. Might want to bring your wallets. Might want to go to the ATM before when you bring your wallets. But that was very comfortable. That was his respite. And we can all speculate why he did what he did. I'm just going to take it at face value that it was a challenge he wanted to unearth and tackle, and that's good enough for me. But during those unique times, right field, the dugout with Tito, Jets and Sticks, those were places where he didn't have to necessarily hide from people, or he could talk what he wanted to talk and compete as only Michael could, and made all of us very comfortable.
Well, I think what you did, John, was confirm what I have been telling people for 26 years. And again, because of this last dance, we are back in the spotlight. You are, I am, Tito is, Mike Barnett, the hitting instructor, and of course, Michael, all because of that. Did you walk away from that year? Did you at least get an autograph? A picture, one or two?
I have some stuff somewhere back, maybe on these shelves. So when we got there, probably I assume the day before opening day, we maybe had a workout and then we had opening day. It was made abundantly clear the moment we walked in, and I apologize. Birmingham had a clubhouse individual that was there for quite a while on the visiting side.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, my short bio that you talk about, Kurt, there's a lot of minor leagues in that short bio. So I had been through that circuit before.
Right.
And so maybe I had earned a little bit of respect from you and a clubhouse guy and others. So I had relationships. And everybody walked in, and we all had one thing on the brain, like, hey, we're hanging out with Michael these first 4-game series. Well, it was like on the doors, on the walls, don't even ask, nothing. Totally get it. That first night, we do our stuff. ESPN, that was some of the heydays of like Sports Center. And we went upstairs. You presumably were there. Michael did a part. I did a part. And I think the ESPN host that they sent there was a guy named Steve Cyphers.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
And it's always in my head. I'll take a shout out. My brother-in-law is Steve Cyphers.
Oh.
And so it was always who lived in Chicago, where it was being back on WGN. Right. And they were the ones that kind of brought up the Duke, UNC, all that type of stuff. But Michael went to talk, then I went to talk, and then we left. And at that point in time, our bus had cleared out because, you know, the hotel by the mall there in Birmingham, Kurt, I mean, that's the big leagues in the
Galleria. Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't the Winfrey, but boy, we really felt like we had made it at that point.
Yeah.
So I was one of the last ones there. And I said to the clubhouse individual, like, come on, you got to give me something. I mean, throw something for the effort here. What should I do? And he said, okay, you know, you didn't hear this from me, but Michael's going to hit early tomorrow at noon by himself. I didn't tell you to come. I didn't tell you he was hitting, but that's what I'm hearing. So woke up that morning. I said, okay, I'm going to give it my best shot. Now, going over to Hoover Met, and that was the Taj Mahal of minor league stadiums.
Right, absolutely.
So it was okay. But for a 7 o'clock start, going over there at 11:30, a little bit early. But you know what? Unique situations call for unique actions. So I go over, I get dressed, shorts, running shoes, and a T-shirt, and I walk out the steps, and Michael's hitting BP by himself. You know, there's 8,000 brand new white pearl baseballs.
Right.
You got Tito, Barnett. I swear, like Charlie Lau, names like that maybe there, because it was like Seminar 101 for hitting. We're going to fast forward everything. So I go out and I veer off and I go to the outside, the warning track, and I just run like poles. I run distance, trying to get my work in, kind of monitoring how the rounds are going. Get done with my running. I go get a glass of water and sit in the dugout, and I can sense, like, they say Michael's got like, hey, 3 more. I'm like, okay, here we go. Let's man up here and see what we got.
Right.
So I trudge out of the dugout. Michael kind of comes out of the batting cage, and I'm walking, and I get about 2 steps from him. And I've been around some interesting folks. The Reds were no slouches. I had been in Major League camp. We had Neon Dion and Barry Larkin and all those people. So I kind of felt like I'd run in some big circles. And I extend my hand, and he finally kind of looks up at my gaze, and I just swallowed my tongue. And I said, Mr. Jordan, I'm John Courtright. I pitched against you last night. And he says, and his hands, were about up my arm, elbow, shoulder, because again, physical gifts. He says, I know who you are. You're the blank, blank, blank that threw at my head last night.
There you go.
And I about fell on my knees apologizing. I think he listened to it for about a minute just to give me the business. And then he was like, come on, man, that's part of the game. It's really nice to meet you. You threw really well. I got to get a little bit better. What can I do for you? And I said, hey, I don't want to bother you, but this is a little unique for me, may not be for you. And he ended up signing a number of things for me.
That's awesome.
Wow. So it was great. And at the end of the process, the bureaucracy of the no autograph zone of Michael, right. He was great with everybody through the course of the summer.
John, I've heard a lot of stories. I've told a lot of stories. That one is now going into my top 5.
I'll never forget that. I mean this in the right way. Sometimes people will say, like, what is the highlight of your career? I had a lot of ups and downs, mostly downs. I played in the big leagues, and I'm very proud of that. Very, very briefly, they talk about who had a cup of coffee. Guys, I had like a sip through a straw of a cup of coffee, like Moonlight Graham sip. And I'm proud of it. But I chuckle a lot because when someone says, what's the highlight? You never really wanted to say it's a minor league highlight because of just certain stigmas. But I tell you what, that was the highlight of my career.
We're all blessed, bro.
Yeah.
One more time with the name of the company before we say goodbye.
It's called ISC Baseball, based out of Chicago, Illinois.
And also offices in LA, I read, and
LA,
really
New York, and wherever there's games, as we know on this call, it's a unique world, and the business is fascinating, particularly in these times. But a lot of my job is hopefully to give the right guidance to players, and where there's a game, I'll try to be there.
John, I can only hope that the 3 of us stay in touch and we do this more often under better circumstances. My last 2 statements: stay healthy, stay safe. Stay safe and healthy. Yes.
It's nice to get reacquainted, and I appreciate the time very much.
All right, buddy. Take care. Have a good one.
All right,
John Courtright, pitcher with the Chattanooga Lookouts back in 1994. First one ever to face Michael Jordan. Bryce Kuhn joining us as well. We'll see you next time.